And now I invite you to join me for our meditation. And I invite you to just close your eyes and begin to become centered. Just breathing in gently. And breathing out. And I invite you to join me in the practice of mindfulness by Thich Nhat Hanh. Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. Breathing in, I notice my in-breath has become deeper. Breathing out, I notice that my out-breath has become slower. Breathing in, I calm myself. Breathing out, I feel at ease. Breathing in, I smile. Breathing out, I release. Breathing in, I dwell in this present moment. And as we enter into the silence, breathing out, I feel it is a wonderful moment. Breathing in, I calm myself. Breathing out, I am at ease. Breathing in, I smile. Breathing out, I release. Breathing in, I dwell in this present moment. And breathing out, I know it is indeed a wonderful moment. And so it is. Jazz at Unity, I love it. Let's give them another hand. Thank you very much for that. That was awesome. So, we're already entering into, week 3 with this book study? Time flies. Time really flies. I hope you all have been enjoying it as much as I have, because it's really been an eye-opener for me, and it's really nice to be able to talk about it amongst, our small groups and just people in passing on Sunday mornings. Now, this morning, I took the dogs out really early. It was probably around 6, and 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning is really quiet outside. And maybe it's just down in Verona where I've been staying temporarily, but it's really quiet. But it was such a beautiful morning this morning. It kind of took me back to living in the Pacific Northwest, but there was like a fog, and it was just so still and quiet. And being in those times of just that silence, just nothing makes me feel more one with the universe than that. And it can kind of start putting things in perspective when we're in those moments. It just makes you kind of think, like politics and all of this stuff, how trivial some of it really seems for us to be fighting about these kinds of things when there's so much beauty around us, right? So Mr. Palmer, at the end of chapter 2, he wrote, "Out of great need, we are all holding hands and climbing. Not loving is a letting go. Listen, the terrain around here is far too dangerous from that," which I thought seemed to be a really good segue into this week. Now, last week we talked about the heart, and we discussed going into our heart space. We discussed going into that heart space to acknowledge our truth of divine love and how we can radiate that divine love out to other people. And this week I want to talk about how to continue to navigate our way through that. Perhaps when the terrain is rough, when we're seeing like senseless fighting and things like that. And perhaps even when the terrain needs a little bit of repair, maybe just a little bit of tweaking every now and then. And how we can use the power of the heart to maybe repair some of the potholes in that rough terrain. So Mr. Palmer includes a quote in our book by author Terry Tempest Williams. And she states, "The human heart is the first home of democracy. It is where we embrace our questions. Can we be equitable? Can we be generous? Can we listen with our whole beings, not just our minds, and offer our attention rather than our opinions? And do we have enough resolve in our hearts to act courageously and relentlessly without giving up, ever trusting our fellow citizens to join with us in our determined pursuit of living democracy?" Now, he talks about her words and says that they served a reminder for him that we are not powerless. If the heart is democracy's first home, then each of us has a share of the power required to restore democracy back to its roots. Because we all have a heart, right? We all have one. But let's first talk about democracy a bit. Now, I know I've mentioned this before, like in the very beginning of our study, but most of us are probably aware of what democracy means from a political standpoint. But what about from a spiritual standpoint? Now, in this series, if you've been here the past couple of Sundays, you've probably heard me mention Jesus a couple of times. And I'm going to explain why. Whoever said oops, I know who you are. I'm going to explain why. But here at Unity, we look at Jesus as our master metaphysician. This guy had it down, right? If you go back and you read nothing else in the Bible but Matthew, Mark, and John, you will see that Jesus had this down. Thank you. He was fully identified with his Christ nature. And if you don't feel comfortable using the word Christ, substitute the word divine. He was in touch with his divine nature, and he knew how to use it. He used it to both feel and to show love, and to show us how to do the same thing. He used it to show others their Christ or their divine nature, and we continue to still use it today. He showed us that if he could do it, we could too, and he laid out a pretty darn good roadmap. So even those that don't want to hear Jesus, he laid out a good roadmap. And you know I got to give you a hard time. But at the end of the day, Jesus still walked within the physical world. Just like the rest of us, he had to live in both the physical and the spiritual, still being in connection with that Christ nature. And just like the rest of us, he often had to juggle the balance between the two. But let's rewind back just a little bit. What exactly is democracy when we approach it from a spiritual perspective? Now, searching around for a definition that really resonated with me on what spiritual democracy really is, something that I could share, it led me to a site called Planetary Philosophy. Now, in that, I perhaps found one of the best definitions that I felt that I could find, that I could share. A man by the name of James Hurd Nixon wrote a paper called Spiritual Democracy. And in that, he defines spiritual democracy as grounded in the reality that we all inhabit a living, conscious universe. We can all take that journey to find inner knowledge, to attain the goal of that knowledge, and to come back and transform ourselves, and then take action for the benefit of our own lives, the life of our species, and the life of the earth. I don't think I could have said it any better. And I like this definition too because it's something we all can do. Every one of us in this room can do our part in that. It doesn't take an advanced degree or some kind of special elevated financial status, job title. We can do it despite the color of our skin, our places of origin. Something we can all do despite those differences that seem to so often separate us in this spiritual realm. Now, the book mentions when a person with political influence ignores or denies the heart's power to shape the world, believing instead that reason is the prime mover of history, it is a recipe for disaster. So again, let's move beyond just those with just political influence. Let's also include spiritual influence. What about the power we all play in that? Not just political leaders, all of us. What happens when we all ignore or deny the power of the heart to shape the world? What do you think the ultimate result is going to be? It's probably not going to be something we really desire to see, is it? Now, Mr. Palmer mentions that he's using the word heart to refer to an integral way of knowing. The kind of knowing that allows author Terry Tempest Williams to claim that the heart is the place where we embrace democracy's complex and challenging questions. So what I want to do today is build on last week. And if you weren't here last week, that's fine. It's not a sequel. But I want to continue to go into the heart, and to do so as we learn what it means to embrace democracy's complex and challenging questions from the perspective of spiritual democracy. So let's start with the first half of that definition for spiritual democracy. Grounded in the reality that we all inhabit a living, conscious universe. We can all take the journey to find inner knowledge, attain the goal of that knowledge, come back, and transform ourselves. So Mr. Palmer talks about what happens when we let our emotions trump the intellect. It's not really overly transformative, is it? Because we can start to become really wrapped up in our own opinions when we do that, within our own ways of seeing the world, possibly even despite facts. So turn on the internet or the TV, and we've all seen our fair share of it, right? Opinions are like the noses on our faces. Most every one of us has one, and often at times, we're going to find ourselves fighting tooth and nail to prove that ours is the only one. I'm guilty of it too. We all are. Then when somebody else pushes back with their opinion of their own, fighting tooth and nail on their end, those emotions can really begin to flare. And this isn't just with politics. This can be with anything and everything. As we all know, chances are pretty high that if it's something we can think about, we can have an opinion on it. And it can go all the way down to how we pronounce things. You say tomato, I say tomato type thing. I don't really say tomato, but we say tomato in Texas and they say tomato in the Pacific Northwest. But when we let our emotions drive, we tend to just kind of sit on the surface of everything. And the Dead Sea comes to mind when I think about this because they say it's almost impossible to really sink things because it's so salty. They say even people just kind of tend to float on the surface due to the salt. And as a result, it probably makes it a little difficult to find out what's really underneath below the surface. If it's hard to get underneath, it's hard to find out what's under there. And being driven by our emotions can do much the same. They can prevent us from taking that journey within to find that inner knowledge. That inner knowledge that in turn helps us begin to transform ourselves. That place where Mr. Palmer states they could go deeper than the intellect to the heart place where all of our faculties converge. Now, when we're willing to do this, we can both change the way we perceive and interact with others in the situations around us. But how do we find the road to that journey within? That becomes the next question. Well, we've got the tools we teach here at Unity. If you've been part of Unity long enough, we utilize tools such as prayer and meditation. And I encourage you to utilize those to your advantage because they are going to help you, especially during those times when things feel a little bit maybe out of sorts and a little chaotic. Utilize those tools to help you. Now, Mr. Palmer tells us the story of a man who was in a very political position. He was the head of one of the Department of Agriculture's, and he talks about how he arrived at that inward place by confronting the tension between his values and the pressure of politics. Now, his story was government politics, but of course it can be anything, even spiritual politics. Now, the man talked about as how a politician, he was supposed to make the decisions that would best benefit agribusiness. That's what he was hired to do. That's what he was elected to do. However, he'd eventually come to the point where one of those decisions would put both our food supply and the earth at risk. So you can kind of start seeing the tension there that he started feeling and the torn paths, different ways he could go. His head told him that he should do what he was supposed to do, and that was, of course, to side with agribusiness. However, his heart told him otherwise, and that's what he decided to do, was to listen to his heart. But he wouldn't have been able to make that decision unless he had done the work before, unless he had journeyed within, gone beneath the depths of the surface, and really learned to consult with that inner teacher that we all have. If he hadn't done that, he might have made the other choice. Now, Mr. Palmer tells us that he held that tension patiently and reflectively as only the heart can do until his heart broke open to a way forward. It was by taking that journey within where he was able to make that moral stand. So this may sound a little counterintuitive, but I ask you to bear with me. One of the ways in which we can begin to navigate that journey within is through heartbreak. Now you may be thinking, whoa, Evan, that's not a place I want to go. I don't want to experience heartbreak. No, why would I want to do that? Well, let me ask you this question. How do we oftentimes find out about the type of people we don't want to date or marry? We've had our hearts broken. And through that, we learned a very valuable lesson, and probably a little bit about what we don't want with a future companion or mate, and probably a little bit about what we do want. Now, there are those occasions where we've probably had our hearts broken and we didn't stop to reflect why. We've just plowed on ahead. Oh, it hurt, but I'm going to plow on ahead. Maybe it wasn't even necessarily through a fault of our own that our heart was broken, but it still always helps to stop and to reflect why it happened. Why being the key word. It's also important to remember here that not everything that breaks is damaged. Sometimes those breaks become our battle wounds, showing that we are survivors, don't they? Now, has anybody in here ever heard the Japanese term kintsugi? And I hope I'm pronouncing that right with my Texas accent. Kintsugi it's a Japanese art form in which breaks or repairs are treated as part of the object's history. Broken ceramics aren't simply just swept up and thrown in the trash somewhere. They're instead carefully mended by artisans with a lacquer resin mixed with powdered gold, powdered silver, or powdered platinum. And the repairs are visible, but yet they're somehow beautiful. You can still see the cracks, but they aren't looked at as damage. They're looked at as a beautiful part of that piece of pottery or whatever it was that was broken. Sometimes one of the best ways for us to heal the heart is to allow it to break. And we do that by making ourselves vulnerable. And why do we make ourselves vulnerable? Because it's within that we find growth. And within that growth, we're truly able to experience the power that each one of us has inside to heal the heart. Now, sometimes we make decisions in advance that we know, we're aware when we make these decisions, that they may ultimately lead to heartbreak. We sometimes do that because we intuitively know that it's a growth opportunity. And sometimes we do it to make a specific choice, much like the agriculture guy did, just because it's the right thing to do at that moment. And that growth opportunity is what allows us, as our spiritual democracy definition states, to come back and to transform ourselves. Now, the second half of our definition of spiritual democracy, and then take action for the benefit of our own lives, the life of our species, and the life of our earth. So we've allowed the heart to break wide open because we know that by doing that, we can start to heal. We can start that journey to heal. But how do we heal? The heart contains the power, but how do we activate that power? Like anything else, it starts with action. Now, again, in the book, Mr. Palmer mentions, we are now at such a place as a nation, we must restore the wholeness of our civic community or watch democracy wither. Hearts opened by the many sources of heartbreak in American life have the potential to help heal our political process. So again, let's take that statement further. Let's not just say American life, let's say all life. Let's also add to help heal our spiritual political process. Now, he mentions how democracy demands its citizens to engage collectively and creatively with issues of great moment and even and especially in times of intense conflict. So that doesn't sound very passive to me. That doesn't sound like we're just sitting there watching it go by. It sounds like action being taken. Don't you think? So the first thing we can do is to make a choice. First, we can blame others for our struggles, for any struggles we may be facing in our lives. We can look around us and blame each other. And with this choice, we're also free to take the role of a victim. It's where we look around and think, God, look at all the chaos around me. It is spinning completely out of control. We're doomed, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. Why is this happening to us? Why is this happening to me? So we can take that. We can take that choice. And this is how our vibration works. Here's the physical or the human down here on the bottom, and here's the spiritual. The more we fall prey to the victim mode, the further down that scale we start to slide. And we'll know it when we're starting to vibrate on that lower vibration because you're going to feel it within. You're going to feel it in the body. Your soul's going to start to feel a little depleted, and it's just going to feel pretty yucky. It's not going to feel good. And that's one action you can take. The other choice is a little bit different, and it raises your vibration from here to here. Or at least halfway, it's better than being down here on the bottom. It's where we live from an environment that pulls us out of that victim mentality. It's where we perceive the world through the eyes of love. And when we do, we find the power of the heart to heal. We still see the physical world around us. It's not going to go away. But we don't perceive it through the lens of human judgment. It's like you just walk into Target, you find you a pair of glasses called spiritual glasses. You put them on and you're like, wow. It's like being in a dark forest and putting on a pair of night vision goggles. Everything becomes so much more clear. Now, John 24 of the Bible tells us that Jesus, our master metaphysician, had something to say about this. He said, "Judge not according to appearances, but judge with righteous judgment." This is where we take control. And we do so by holding those things or people that caused that heartbreak in the first place with something I mentioned last week, a consciousness of divine love. And this one's a little hard to describe, so what I'm going to do is take you through an exercise. Is everybody willing? And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to jump up and do jumping jacks. We're not going to do that kind of exercise, so just relax. What I want to ask you to do is join me in a quick practice to practice seeing through the eyes of divine love. Is everybody willing? Okay. So I'm going to ask you to just close your eyes if you feel comfortable, or keep them open, whatever you feel the most comfortable with. And just imagine yourself sitting in a subway or some other public place. Now suddenly you look up and you see a person seat themselves across from you. But this isn't just any person. This is the person that you personally have difficulty in seeing the divinity within. And it can be somebody you know on a personal level, or even someone you don't. Maybe it's a politician, it's a teacher, can be anyone. Okay, now imagine yourself closing your eyes within your vision. And I invite you to do something a little counterintuitive. Don't try to love this person. Instead, I ask you to move into that place where you begin to feel yourself become centered. Just breathing and becoming centered. Now begin to imagine someone or something that brings you great joy and feelings of great love. It can be a person, it can be a pet, anything that brings those feelings. Now just allow those feelings of warmth and love and compassion to flow freely throughout your body. It's covering every square inch inside of your body. Now, imagine those feelings of warmth, love, and compassion flowing out of your body like a light. And that light begins to encircle and enfold the person you've had difficulty seeing the divinity within. And you may open your eyes when you're ready. Now, like most anything, it takes practice. And I do invite you to try this the next time you feel your vibration beginning to lower. Maybe next time you turn on the TV or you log on to social media. It can be anything that just really gets under your skin at any given moment. And doing this exercise doesn't mean that you're going to suddenly open your eyes and find yourself flooded with loving feelings toward that person or situation. It doesn't mean that you've done it wrong if you don't. Nor is that about changing someone else. It's all about letting go. And it's all about seeing through the consciousness in the eyes of divine love, the truth of who and what we really are. It's almost kind of like when we hold on to forgiveness. We don't allow forgiveness to flow out. It doesn't hurt the person we don't forgive. It instead hurts us, doesn't it? Sometimes we heal not by being able to change someone else or a situation, but by learning to let it go and let it go in divine love. So the main point today I want to make is that we all have the power to heal within the heart. It's right here. Sometimes we do that by allowing it to break wide open. A heart with cracks isn't indicative of a weak heart or a weak person. It is instead indicative of someone who has done the work, your battle wounds, so to speak, and wear it proudly. Someone who's dared to allow themselves to be vulnerable. Someone who has taken that inner journey of love and that inner journey of transformation. Only then are you going to be able to truly discover the power of the heart. The power of the heart to love, the power of the heart to transform, and the power of the heart to heal. Are you ready? All right, I was hoping you would say that. Namaste.